Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome back once again to Loring Hall to the first session of the Leading Together event, the panel discussion on the topic Indigenous Communities, Shaping the Future of Education and Pedagogy. It gives me immense pleasure to be moderating this very special session. To begin with, I'd just like to introduce our very important and knowledgeable panelists who will be sharing their insights for this morning's discussion. We have with us here Dr. Ketukre, who is working as an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at Guwahati College under Nagaland University. She has been working in the field of education for approximately 13 years, and she is a fellow at the Highland Institute, Guwahati, Nagaland. She was awarded the Zuban Sasakawa Peace Foundation grant for young researchers from Northeast India in 2021. Her academic and research interests include borderland and border communities in South Asia, identity politics in Northeast India, peace and conflict resolution, human rights, particularly the marginal groups such as women, indigenous communities, minorities, and persons with disabilities. She's also undertaken and completed research projects, some of which include a study on the borderland communities along the Indo-Myanmar border with special reference to the Kiamingnung Nagas, which was funded by the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, Guwahati University. And another very interesting project that she's worked on, from which we would like to hear more from her, is on the mainstreaming the lived experiences of persons with disabilities in Nagaland, a gender perspective. And now she's currently working on an ICSSR-funded major research project, I'm told, titled Living at the Periphery, Territory, Culture and Identity of the Tikir Nagas, a scheduled tribe in Nagaland near the Indo-Myanmar border. Thank you for agreeing to be the panelist and coming all the way from Guwahati to be a part of this discussion. The next we have here, I'll start with the ladies and finish off with the man last. Dr. Dolly Kikon. Of course, she needs no introduction. I think she is a well-known personality, but just allow me to just mention a few highlights about her. She's a Stanford alumni and an associate professor in the Anthropology and Development Studies program in the University of Melbourne. Her work focuses on political economy of extractive resources, militarization, migration, development initiatives, gender relations, food cultures, and human rights in India. She is a woman of many, many accomplishments and capabilities, very reputed and well-known in the academic circles. And I know with such a strong love for Indigenous communities. And of course, she's also another very prolific writer whose current writing projects include ongoing book manuscript on fermenting cultures and a report on the impact of the 2020 Baekjeon oil spill in Assam. She has also directed and produced an ethnographic film titled Seasons of Life, Foraging and Fermenting Bamboo Shoot During Ceasefire. As an engaged anthropologist, Dr. Kikon is one of the lead researchers for the Recover, Restore, and Decolonize initiative. It's a community-led movement to start dialogues on repatriation of Indigenous Naga ancestral human remains from the Pitt Rivers Museum at Oxford University. We will also be having a panel discussion on this tomorrow. And she has I had the pleasure of recently attending her book launch titled Food Journey, Stories from the Heart, published by Zuban Books, New Delhi. She's one of the editors of the books. And I just heard that yesterday she also launched another book, Life and Dignity. Really, congratulations to all of these accomplishments. Dr. Kikon was honored as a Lokavor champion in 2022 for her work on Indigenous food practices in India. So that's Dr. Dolly Kikon. Now I would like to move on to introducing our next panelist, Mr. Kevisato Sanyo, who is the founder of Naga Ed. Naga Ed is a digital education firm where Kevisato and his team, they supply digital education services tailored for tribal and indigenous communities. Kevisato's professional trajectory initially led him to conservation, where he dedicated his early career to bolstering environmental legislation and policies for endangered species, wilderness expanses, and rainforests in his adopted homeland of Australia. So prior to relocating to Nagaland, Kevisato was working at RMIT University, Australia, at the Centre of Academic Quality and Excellence, where he fashioned academic quality appraisal mechanisms for the 500 plus programs on offer. Kevisato is also a member of the National Committee on Skill Development and Livelihood at the Confederation of Indian Industry and an advisory board member of UPSOL. Here we have it, the three panelists for this morning, who will be sharing with us their perspectives and their knowledge on the future of education and pedagogy. I think we would all agree that Indigenous communities around the world really have so much to offer with regard to their history, their culture, their ways of knowing, that are sometimes intentionally or unintentionally suppressed or sidelined. And in the recent years, there has been a really strong push in incorporating Indigenous perspectives into education and pedagogy, all in an effort to create much more inclusive and culturally relevant learning environments. So with this focus on Indigenous communities, I think in a world where there's always just so much going on and so much noise, so many issues to focus on, what we're all here to do this morning in this panel is to really just offer the respect and the recognition to the way these Indigenous communities approach teaching and learning. So I'd like to invite all of the students to open up their minds and to reflect on the insights that the panelists will share this morning. I'd also like to mention at this time that for all of the sessions of the conferences, we'll be having students share their reflections to conclude each of the sessions. So for this session, we'll be hearing from Arindam Joshi from Savitribai Phule Pune University and R. Tamizaruvi from Stella Maris College, Chennai, after the session. So we look forward to hearing from all of you students too. Okay, so for this panel discussion, we'll just have a few discussions or reflect on some questions, after which I will be opening the time, giving time to the audience to ask questions. So students, you may note down questions in between, and I'll give you time to put out your questions to this panelist afterwards. So to start off with, I would like to ask Dr. Dolly Kikon. You've been working very closely with Indigenous communities on a number of projects, from food, seed sovereignty, gender injustice, so much more. Drawing from all of the experiences that you've had amongst the Indigenous communities, how do you feel that we can better incorporate all of this experience, the Indigenous experience or Indigenous perspectives, into the education system and our pedagogy?
Thank you so much, and I apologize if you thought that I was scrolling my phone and not listening to Havesa. I was trying to find an email that I received, I think 2 days ago, from a student, and I received quite a number of emails from students that I don't know, and I think that's something quite distinct that I would like to highlight, because I do receive emails for peer reviews. You know, as an academic, that's what we do, to examine thesis, PhD thesis as an external examiner. But I think what is exceptional that I find in my own standing and my own experience as a scholar, and we call it a tribal scholar, we call it Indigenous scholar here, is a lot of students write to me about just their feelings. Right? It's not that they want anything from me. They just tell me that, Professor Kikon, we just wanted to make sure that you know how I'm feeling right now. And so I was trying to very quickly find that email. Maybe if I find it, I'll read it out. But it's about students from Indigenous communities, from marginalized communities, in India writing to me, where often there will be a sentence which says, I thought I was going mad, or I thought, what I was feeling was insane, because there are very few professors out there who even validate what I'm feeling. They think that I'm just stupid, until I came across your work or your lecture online, or, an essay that you wrote. And now I feel that I'm not mad, right? It's almost, how can I say? It's almost to a level of insanity that students are driven from marginalized communities, from indigenous communities, to feel what we feel, to look at the worldview that we have and try to theorize or try to conceptualize to understand the world around us. It's, I think, then to say something really, really heavy, like educational institutions, higher educational institutions, being an accomplice in this pedagogical violence. Second, in a sense of having student community, and especially research communities, often have that nature of intellectual bullying to tell students from marginalized communities to say that your experiences don't matter, right? If you're a Dalit in India, your experiences don't matter. If you are an Adivasi, a tribal, your experiences don't matter. You have to constantly adapt and adopt to the dominant framework. And I feel that that needn't be the case, given the wealth of knowledge, the wealth of, I think, worldviews that we bring. One of the things that I often say very proudly is the ability for us as Indigenous people to inherit and to have that in us about storytelling. And I say that for all children who were brought up, I think, around Indigenous cultures, both Indigenous, non-Indigenous families, to say what kind of storytelling methods we have. Any kind of philosophy, theory that we look at around the world, storytelling and how we listen is so integral and important. So I feel that the kind of, I think, projects that you have named for yourself, from the seed, sovereignty, from my association with food, justice, I think it's been to draw deeply from where I come from, this land, and to value that with so much challenges that we have around, structural inequality, structural violence, the history of militarization, that is also part of our present. And how do we then begin to heal? So my justice work has also been around that. And I feel that, I think there need to be a deeper commitment and an honesty to the land that we belong to values like, I think, compassion. We often don't talk about compassion and education in the same sentence. There's such a heightened way of talking about intellectual and higher education projects that almost disassociates lived realities. I feel that as a Naga scholar, we cannot go to the world and tell them that we have made it until and unless the most vulnerable and the most, I think, marginalized people within our community, Nagas, non-Nagas, who have adopted Nagaland as home, begin to walk the journey with us. I think that's been my commitment, and we can carry the conversations further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experiences and those reflections. I'll pick up on some of those topics that you highlighted later too. The second question I'd just like to direct to Dr. Ketukre, who, as an educationist with 13 years experience in Nagaland, what are your thoughts on integration of Indigenous knowledge systems into this mainstream educational curricula?
Before I answer the question and share my views, I would like to thank the administration of Tetso College for inviting me to be a part of this great event. As I entered the campus, I felt like it's a pre-Christmas celebration. And I really wonder how you guys pulled it together, because in Kohima we are so busy with conducting our exams, and here you are so, so coolly doing your own stuff very beautifully. I really appreciate the students, the faculty and staff for doing this amazing work. I'm also very, very happy to be sharing this panel with my model, Madam Dolly. She told me not to call her Madam, but she is still a Madam for me, because as she was sharing, I often, wrote mails to her, and she graciously, every time I wrote something, she graciously, replied. It was, I think, more than 10 years ago. I met her for the first time in Singapore, National University of Singapore. And since then, I have been following her work. And she has been a great source of motivation for me, personally as well as professionally. I receive a lot of healing listening to your talks and reading your works. So I'm so happy to be here. I'm also very happy to be sharing the same panel with Kevisato for the amazing work that he is doing. We really appreciate your work and your team's work. Yeah. So talking about education, talking about the integration of indigenous knowledge system and the mainstream educational system, I think most of you would agree with me that for a very long time we have been following this colonized or a Western system of education here, even in Nagaland. And for a very long time, our indigenous knowledge or indigenous knowledge system has been neglected. And for that matter, we are at a stage that many of us, we are losing our own culture. We are losing our own identity and our language. I have a 6-year-old son. Today, he refuses, or he finds difficult to speak in my dialect and even his father's dialect. He calls himself an Englishman, and that is a very sad reality. I tried my best to teach him my dialect and insist that he also learns his father's dialect. But I think the whole system is in the whole process of modernization and westernization that all of us, we are going through. And coming to the curricula, from the preschool itself, we are taught how to speak English, and children would get, sticks, or they will get beatings from the teachers for speaking their own mother tongue or Nagamis. So that is the kind of, enforced educational system that we are forced to follow. But I believe that over the last few years, or at least the past decade, we have seen that we have realized that it is very, very important for us to go deep into our indigenous practices. And there are many people who are also advocating the need to incorporate the indigenous knowledge system. So we have seen many educational institutions incorporating some part of the cultural or traditional activities or practice in the academic calendar as well. And we have seen that. But however, we still need a very very strong educational policy. I would like to bring in the National Education Policy 2020. This National Education Policy 2020 encourages the learning of Indian knowledge system. So for that matter, in Nagaland, I think I'm not saying that we should not go for indigenous knowledge system, but I would propose that educational institutions, educators, and even parents, we should think about how we can incorporate Naga indigenous knowledge system or the indigenous knowledge system of the Northeast into the mainstream educational curriculum. And for that, we need people who can work on curriculum development. First of all, planning, design, and development, which we found very much missing in our land. So I think there is a great need, and it's an urgent call. And I think that this is a very good platform for us to think about, integrating not just the curriculum as well, but also the teaching methodologies, the teaching aids, and the tools which we can use in our own indigenous way to impart knowledge to our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ketukre. I'm really glad that you mentioned about curriculum development, because I think that's something at the core of what many of our educators in Nagaland Nagaland really need to get in better, closer touch with. And I think that's also what Naga Ed is doing. So I'd just like to request Mr. Kevisato to please tell us more about what Naga Ed's involvement towards shaping the future of education through Indigenous knowledges has been so far.
So when we started out Naga Ed, I was calling my partner Shiroi, and we were looking at different areas in which we could contribute to our community. That was kind of our guiding star. The question was, what is our contribution to our community? And we found that, and I think why we're here, is education was one of the greatest needs for our community. And as highlighted by our other panelists as well, is that the education system that we have right now is unbalanced. So we've been hyper-optimized, inherited a British system, hyper-optimized under the Indian system for a particular output, which is sitting your board exams, because it's directly linked to livelihoods. So the majority of our jobs come from government. We have some of the highest rates of government employment in the country. And so if a young person wants to get educated and have a livelihood, it's directly linked to getting a job in the government, which is directly linked to performance in your board exams. So it's really crowded out the space for our Indigenous practices and the way that we practice knowledge under our Murung system. Mainly under the Murung system, it's tied to our village. We had the sovereignty of our village. That was the peak of our culture, coming from our family, our clan, our kel, and then to our village. And our knowledge and our Indigenous practices is about how do we contribute to that sovereign village, right? How do we have a community-based system that we live symbiotically with our fellow people in the village and with the natural world? And so that's how I define our Indigenous practices or Indigenous knowledge. So in understanding that that space is now crowded out, how do we then bring back, or how do we maintain balance? And in those areas, to align with our Indigenous practices, we've identified 2 additional areas in addition to the academic areas. So one is essential skills. So under the Murung, under the village lifestyle, your education is what are the essential skills that you need to live and work. And that is what was taught. The other one part we call lessons for living, which is how are you a contributing member to your village community? And we've expanded that to how are you a contributing member to your global village community? But essentially, it ties back to our relationship with our village and our relationship with people in that village and our relationship to the nature around that village. So how do we bring aspects? So we've looked at it in 3 different pillars for the company, looking essentially our academics, so our leading up to our board exams, aligning ourselves with the NEP. But in addition to that, adding those areas of essential skills that might be different now in the world that we live in, but essentially skills to survive and thrive in the world that we find ourselves. And lessons for living. How do we build moral fortitude? How are we contributing members to our community? And I think that ties directly to the values of our indigeneity and how we identify as Indigenous peoples.
Right, thank you so much for sharing on that. So with regard to this whole imparting of Indigenous knowledge and integrating it into education now, we've talked about compassion in education, looking more closely at what Indigenous students face. I think Dr. Dolly had mentioned that in her opening statement about being given recognition or being acknowledged on the feelings that students need to grapple with modernity, with tradition. And I asked this question to all of the panelists here, how do we change this narrative? How do we help them decolonize the existing narratives of being told, how would they negotiate with this tradition and with this modern education system what would be your response to the students to best address this complexity that they are faced with at a time when the push towards technology is so strong, push towards modernity and new age learning methods are so strong, but at the same time, we're being told to focus on indigenous knowledges, your practices. How do they negotiate with this type of engagement as they also try to be modern citizens, globally, global citizens of this world, at the same time be in touch with their indigenous identity? I put that question to any of the panelists, all of you, if you could share a response on that, that would be great.
Howesa, thank you so much for the question. And I have no answer to that because it's so big, and I think it's a thought in progress for all of us, right? It's daunting. I think many Naga students are still first generation in many ways, where their parents, both mother and father, hasn't finished high school or at the most college dropouts. And all of a sudden, the jump that we are having to the global, I would say, through technology, through the net, through the digital world, sometimes creates quite an imbalance, because the reality is that majority of us, I think in the 21st century, are going to become migrants, are going to really be in the service industry, are really going to be faced with the reality that we have very minimum skills, right? That our shelf life, I know it's quite derogatory, but our shelf life, our professional life sometimes is going to end the moment our body breaks down. So those are the realities. So what are we looking at? I think these are the realities in front of us. But since you maybe use the word decolonize, right? How do we decolonize our mind? And that's a process, that's a topic that I have been talking about as an educator myself. And like my co-panelists said, not looking at Western-centric educations, but how do we place value here, back to where we belong? And sometimes it's tough. Sometimes it's very hard because of the past that we all inherit. The past that we have of violence, the past that we have of colonization. So in a sense, I just came back from, I think, giving some talks and interacting with college students and with university students in Mokokchung and in Lumami, Nagaland University. And we were talking about decolonization. I know, such a weird concept, that it doesn't really make sense for a lot of us. We have so much happening here. And what is decolonization? Why should we care about that? So I was at this college called Jubilee College, which is in Mokokchung, and it's part of the Our Baptist Church initiative. And we saw the statue, a live statue of Reverend Longri at the college, one of our Naga visionaries and leaders. And we started talking about decolonization. And sometimes I think these concepts comes to us. The language that I'm speaking, English Takoyase, and then Nagamis is a market language that came up from the foothills of the Naga Hills and Assam when our ancestors began to trade and barter with the Brahmaputra Valley. So it's also a language. Then I also speak Lotha, my mother tongue. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say is, I know that when we talk about modernization, when you talk about globalization, it can be very confusing. But I think since the time of the Industrial Revolution, since we have something called electricity, nothing remained the same. So if we are talking about the shock that we are going through by the digital technology media, can you imagine a few hundred years ago when people in Europe discovered electricity, how life changed? That it was no longer the lamps after sunset, it was electricity. Then came the photos, then came the videos, and I think we're still going through the process. So as part of the human species, what I want to tell students here is that we are going to see changes only in this lifetime of a magnitude that we can't even imagine. When that happens to you, remember Never forget the ground beneath your feet. Who are you? I always tell my beloved students and my colleagues that the colonizers and those who came to conquer us knew very well who they were. They knew or they believed that they were superior to us in terms of their race, in terms of their education, in terms of their knowledge. And like our esteemed guest today, Abu Mehta told us, we as Nagas have been studied to bits. We have been written about by all European scholars who have come to study, but what have we done, in a sense, to understand who we are? So sometimes it just starts by asking very simple questions. If the colonizers knew who they were, and if the oppressors who come to exploit us know who they are so well, do we know who we are? I think that, in a sense, resonates with the questions that my honorable co-panelists have asked about language and also about skills. So maybe I'll stop here.
I resonate with a lot of what you said, Dolly. Something that I think we're struggling with is not just that we're entering into a new world, but we're adapting in a very compressed timeline. So we're talking about our people, our communities, adapting to 4 industrial revolutions, sometimes in one generation. So I think about the way that my father lived. He was an animist. Our family was not Christian initially in the beginning. And so we would sacrifice chickens to Chikeo for a good hunting season. We'd have Sekrani, we'd have our festivals. And then from then we moved into Christianity. He traversed the globe. We ended up in Australia. When I was growing up, I saw my first computer. I think when I was 9, and I peeped through the window of the school and there had 2 computers there. So in our family, we're adapting to 4 industrial revolutions in one generation. And for large parts of community, in fact, more than 80% of our community, we're doing it in this generation. So not only are we adapting to that, we're also waking up to our consciousness of an indigenous people within this generation. So the idea of Nagas being indigenous as a self-identity is relatively new. The Naga identity in itself is also relatively new. From 1920s, 30s, we coined this term from others. So as Dolly was saying, we really have to know ourselves, right? Before for us to be able to adapt and to keep true to our cultures, to our values, we really need to know ourselves. And for me, that really, again, as I was saying before, ties back to our village state, right? So the core values in our education at a Murung level, the core values or our being is actually orientated around our village state. And so for me personally, it's about a practice of continually going back to your village, about experiential learning, so sitting with your elders, learning with them, learning the things that they do, and try to see the world from their point of view, because it's tremendously different now from beyond their imagination. And as our co-panelists will say, the world that we're going into will be beyond our imagination now. Some of the work that I did in Australia was about the future of work and how we adapt to the future of work. Within that realm, we have a few skill sets, right? About the changing landscape, especially as we're going into the cyber-physical world. Some of those skill sets that we're talking about, where we've adapted to due to our political history and due to our cultural history. So some of those being sense-making, collaboration, adaptive and novel thinking. We've been pressured into forming those skills. So as we're going out into the world, as we're awakening ourselves, my hope for our generation and the generations coming up is that we invest in those skills that we've had since time immemorial because those are the skills and those are the coveted skills that the world is looking for today. So moving forward, that's really where I would say it would be great for our young people to look back, enable for them to look forward.
Okay. I'm just gonna move on to a couple of other questions which we can try to get to, directed it to Dr. Ketukre. Speaking from the perspective of persons with disabilities, how can we shape our education and curricula to be more inclusive of this segment of society? We also have students from Chennai, from Pune, and from various indigenous communities over here. So different marginalized sections of society, how would we, bringing everyone into the discussion, how would we try to be more sensitive to persons with disabilities? How can we really make our education system much more inclusive?
Before I answer that question, I would like to put a disclaimer. I'm not an expert on disability studies. I've just started my journey into this sector. I am a lifelong learner of political science, and as a student of political science, I always, thought about the concepts, normative concepts like justice, rights, equality, and all. And my work with disability started with Zuban Fellowship, and for that, I'm very grateful to Zuban Sasakawa Peace Foundation grant. It's not that I have not known people having disabilities. All my life, I have been living with relatives who had disabilities. I had friends who had disabilities, but as a subject matter or as a discipline, I did not put attention. But through this fellowship, I was somehow motivated and also forced into looking into this disability sector. Now, talking about disability issue, particularly indigenous communities, most indigenous communities, we see disability from religious or spiritual perspective. Some see disabilities as punishment from God. Some see it as blessings. So even in my work, when I had interaction with families having members with disabilities, they gave their experiences, sharing that some of them, they think that it's a gift from God. And I was also told that there is, in a particular village, a young boy was dressed in traditional attire, and every year during the harvest, he would be taken to his field. And they believe that whenever he accompanied his parents, the harvest is bountiful. So that's the kind of attachment that they have attached with being a gift or being a blessing from God. But majority of the people think that disability is a curse. It's a punishment because of the sins of your parents or the sins of your ancestors. And for a very long time, we have not, thought about or talk about these persons with disability in Nagaland openly. They have been hiding for a very long time, and today I'm glad that there are many special schools, there are many inclusive schools coming up, but at a larger level, these are confined mostly to Kohima and Dimapur. They are yet to make entry into other rural places. So I think the government has to take serious, policy decision and also see to it that the policies which are adopted are put into place properly. Now, coming back to inclusive education, I think it is very, very important that education has to be inclusive. Education is one of the strongest weapons that we have as people. And I think that this particular group of people, persons with disabilities, they have to be given access to education. And for this, I think it is very, very important that we go back to the indigenous values like solidarity that we share with our own community people. We also need to think about caregiving, how we can care for one another in a community, because in olden times, even the persons with disabilities, they were seen to be more integrated into the society comparing to today. Because today in town and in cities, we see that there are also avenues where these persons with disabilities are also helped and they are empowered. But there are also big sections of persons with disabilities who are hidden away from the gaze of the government, who are hidden away from the services which are available for them. So I don't know whether I'm answering the question correctly or not, but this is something that really troubles me, because in Nagaland, yes, we have seen schools coming up, but we have seen that there are many children with disabilities in rural areas who are locked inside their houses when their farmer parents who are farmers, they go to their field. And early intervention could have avoided many of these disabilities to a large extent. So early intervention is something that we need. And also for educational institutions, I think it is very, very important that we have inclusive policy. UGC has come up with the inclusive guidelines. I'm not saying that anything that comes from the central is good, but what I'm saying is that it is very, very important that education sector, education department in Nagaland, both school and higher education, we have to come up with our own policies to take care of these indigenous persons with disabilities. And another thing is that at the college level or even at the school level, we have to look at whether they have accessibility to the education that we are providing or not. Not just physical accessibility, but attitudinal, our behavior, our attitudes toward these persons with disability. And also the social situation, how we treat these persons with disability. Today in Kohima, we have good number of schools coming up with there's facilities for children, but most of the schools are from the families who had struggled with these issues themselves. They don't want others to go through the same thing, so they have started preschools. They have started schools for these children with disabilities. So my greatest concern is, at the school level, we have students with disabilities. The school education department is also doing some work, and we have the data. But what happens to students in higher secondary and in college? Let me also tell you the figure of iShare report, All India Survey on Higher Education, 2021. The data shows that we have only 8 students with disabilities in higher education. 8 students. And in school level, we have more than 2,000 students. So where do these 2,000 students go after they finish their class 10? This is one question that, I'm trying to figure out. And this really troubles me, as a teacher. So in our college, Kohima College, we have a small committee which was set up to take care of the needs of students with disabilities. Right now, we have 7 students identified. These students, they also have difficulty coming out, and accepting themselves that they are having some certain kind of disabilities. So I think for the students also, they need to accept the fact that they have such disabilities and come forward. And also from the authority, from the college management or authority side also, we should keep things in place for them, like having barrier-free access infrastructure or even study materials. Now, what we urgently need is we need manpower. We need teachers who are specially trained in this disability sector. And very unfortunately, I'm not an expert in this. So I just wish that we have some, policy intervention in creating some special schools or institutions specially meant for this students with disabilities, so that we can also help them. And by helping them, I think we are helping ourselves, because we are all part of this community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing about that, because I think this is one aspect that's really not talked about enough, inclusive education and thinking about the students, persons with disabilities. How do we get them access to education? Really happy that Kohima College has started a unit focused on these students. Tetso College has also faced similar cases where having students speak out on their own disability and being being tagged as or being labeled as that becomes very difficult for them to accept. How do we bring a team of people to work together on addressing all of these issues and bringing all stakeholders, educators, policymakers to come together and frame policies that will benefit and task forces that will actually follow up on the implementation. So I'd like to go back to Dr. Dolly on speaking about from Indigenous communities. We've talked about some of the challenges. We've talked about compassion, having empathy and more caregiving to Indigenous communities and all marginalized sections. What now do you think we should focus on and prioritize at this moment in time to foster faster progress, educational growth within these Indigenous communities? What are the key strengths and advantages of the Indigenous communities that need to be prioritized?
I think at this moment, because we are having this conversation here in Dimapur, in the state of Nagaland, and the northeastern region of India has 8 states. The northeastern region of India has 8 states, and I think the focus is really government support. The focus is government support. I appreciate the government of Nagaland giving in a lot of support, aid to music. We have the Hornbill Festival starting very soon. All of us will go, who can find rooms and bookings around Kohima. But it is time that all of us in this room feel that it is time for education. It is time to devote ourselves to knowledge and knowledge making. Because the challenges that my 2 co-panelists have shared are challenges where we need the government to step in. If we have to focus on our ancestral practices of Morung knowledge, on bringing in our issues of disability within schools, within colleges, the other side of this challenge then is to have government support, education department, women, children welfare department, come on board and say, listen, we are here, how do we make this okay? My fear is that because I worked with Naga migrants for my second book, and I went across India looking at the kind of savings they have. And trust me, for a lot of families here, Naga families, we are, I think, just one stop away from being bankrupt the moment a family member falls ill. Right? So no matter how much skills we have and the money we bring in, we are just one stop short of mortgaging our land, our house, our land documents the moment a family member falls ill. This is the kind of vulnerability, this is the kind of precarity that we have. So for me, Hawessa, the focus would be really to call upon the government to look into the educational institutions to make sure that we have the support. And given what my colleague this morning said, that investing in education and knowledge is a long-term investment. But we need to have that urgency to say that if we invest in disability care, in educating our indigenous, our students with disability, they will be the future leaders, writing the policies here for the state government, for the country, and be the representatives, be assets, be thinkers, be philosophers for the world as well. And I think this is really key and important. The focus, my final point, should be then, how do we together think about being in a position where we focus on education, where we are there as support even for governments to be able to write reports. I often hear that the government of Nagaland has firms from Delhi, from Kolkata, from other places where they hire to write reports for state governments. And I think that practice needs to be revisited. And this is for the policymakers, for the administrators, for the politicians there. Look at the skills that Naga students can bring in, that higher education can bring in, that amazing scholars sitting here in our land can bring in. And I think this is what the focus on education, what the focus on knowledge can do. So my answer would be that, Havesa, to focus on government support. Along with the Hornbill, we also need the Hornbill of knowledge, wisdom, and all to be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dolly. Yes, focus on government support, so necessary in order to help, higher education and all of these plans for implementing the national education policy or whatever new policies that have to be introduced to be made more inclusive. I believe Mr. Kevesato, Naga Ed has also been doing a lot of work at the ground on training educators, creating courses or programs that would be beneficial or that's necessary to upskill our educators and the community members. Can you tell us a bit more of what are the skills? You mentioned about investing in certain skills to empower our community members. What is the work that Naga Ed is doing, and what more do you think we need to focus on?
Thanks for the opportunity to plug, Hewasa. So I recently got back from Kifri, which is on the border of India and Myanmar. So we're working with a few schools there. We're working with the district administration. One of the key areas that we're focusing on is really uplifting the teachers' capabilities. So when we're talking about uplifting education, the delivery mechanism is our teachers, right? Without the learning that occurs is the relationship between the teacher and the student. So how do we maximize that opportunity? How do we maximize that time? And one of the ways that we see that possible is by leveraging technology. So in going in these areas, actually, when we went there, we were looking at the connectivity in the area. There's amazing 5G, you won't believe it. We went to Sitimi, we went to Salomi, Pukyo, we went all these places, and Geo has built towers everywhere. I think our government has an agenda about connectivity in that area. And so we were getting speeds of about 350 megabits per second. It was amazing. So one of the long barriers about getting digital education into these areas has been connectivity. And for these villages dotted on the border, some of those issues have been resolved. Right. The second one was about getting the physical technology there. One of the amazing things that we found was that during this period, the government had deployed almost a tablet to almost every student. And I think almost every government school got 2 smart TVs. And some of these classes, we're talking about 20, 30 students. Some of the schools, we're talking about 50 or 100 students at the most. So, but despite all of this, the technology wasn't being utilized, right? And so one of the key things is our community and our people's relationship with technology, the accountability we have when we're given these resources. How do we address that? So we went there. We went there on a listening mission. We surveyed about 800 students. We spoke to dozens of student teachers and administrators. And for us, to bridge that gap and bring quality education by leveraging technology is really about how do we overcome these behavioral barriers and this, I don't even know how to describe it, like a resentment or not even a resentment, just a barrier with technology. So that's something that we're looking into because there's a great opportunity here. One of the great opportunities that we've had is that we can bypass the third industrial revolution. So we don't have to go through that whole mechanization process. We don't have to go through the extraction of the resources. I think we mentioned that moving forward, we're going to be in a very service-based industry, a knowledge-based industry. We're looking for knowledge workers. And so our indigenous value of preserving nature, we can continue and meet the world in the fourth industrial revolution without having to go through those same processes that other communities have gone through around the world about extracting their resources. The second thing is that as we're moving forward into the fourth industrial revolution, the world is looking for certain skills that cannot be replaced by AI, right? These skills are human skills. And these are the skills that we have because we've built them through generations, because of the structure of our villages, because we have some of the most linguistically diverse communities for a single geographic region, because we've been through tremendous political turmoil. So for these reasons of our cultural history, our political history, we can double down on some of these skills. So for us to be able to education institutes, for government to be able to promote these skills, sense-making, adoptive and novel thinking, collaboration, these are the highly coveted skills. So not only can we meet the world and progress ourselves without extracting our natural resources, but we can also meet the world and fulfill these gaps, right? And then one great opportunity, last one, is that the value systems that we hold in our villages, right, about respect for one another, about having a symbiotic relationship, about a communitarian ethos, and about protecting nature. These are the values that the world needs today. So for our institutions, for our government to be able to focus in on these areas, is an opportunity to give a tremendous gift to our global village.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I now just gonna open the floor up to the audience in a minute. So students or staff, anyone who'd have questions, you can pose your questions to the panelists. Before we get into that, I just want to ask the same question to Dr. Kitukria on what are the key strengths and advantages do you think that Indigenous communities right now, what should we prioritize to foster faster educational growth and progress?
Right now, we are going through revolution even in educational system. A lot has been emphasized on the use of ICT, and also artificial intelligence is something that we are all happy about it, but something that we should all be scared of also, because if we are not careful, we will be replaced very soon. But something that cannot be replaced is what I agree with Kevisato, is that the values that we have, the values, the moral values that each one of us, as a part of this larger community possess. Like, for example, today, many people in the world, they are having problem with depression. And in this fast competitive life, depression is something that is, that is also affecting many students and even teachers, educators as well. But when we try to look at the indigenous system, we see that in a community, we take care of one another. We do compete. No doubt that we don't, it's not that we don't compete, but our competition is not unhealthy. But in a capitalist society or in a consumerist society, which is filled with competition, which is filled with toxic competition, I think from indigenous values such as caring for one another, sharing with one another, and looking at holistic approach of education. Because as we have learned, the Western education is mostly for survival. But I think indigenous education, it gives meaning to our life. Not just survival, not just concern about what we get to eat, but I think it also gives meaning and purpose to our life. So I think we have to go back to that we need to care for one another as members of the indigenous community, irrespective of the differences that we have.